got a little YouTube video to start us out.
I remember a teacher that I had. Now, I went through the 7th grade. I went to the 7th grade. And I left home when I was 10 years old because I was hungry. And I used to, this is true. I work in the summer and I go to school in the winter. But I had this one teacher. He was the principal of the Harrison School in Vincennes, Indiana. To me, this was the greatest teacher, a real sage of my time, anyhow. He had such wisdom. And we were all reciting the Pledge of Allegiance one day. And he walked over, this little old teacher, Mr. Laswell was his name. Mr. Laswell, he says, he says, I've been listening to you boys and girls recite the Pledge of Allegiance all semester, and it seems as though it's becoming monotonous to you. If I may I recite it and try to explain to you the meaning of each word. I, me, an individual, a committee of one, pledge, dedicate all of my worldly goods to give without self-pity, allegiance, my love and my devotion to the flag, our standard, Old Glory, a symbol of freedom. Wherever she waves, there's respect, because your loyalty has given her a dignity that shouts freedom is everybody's job. United. That means that we have all come together. States, individual communities that have united into 48 great states. 48 individual communities with pride and dignity and purpose. All divided with imaginary boundaries, yet united to a common purpose, and that's love for country. And to the republic, a state in which sovereign power is invested in representatives chosen by the people to govern. And government is the people, and it's from the people to the leaders, not from the leaders to the people, for which it stands. One nation, meaning so blessed by God, indivisible, incapable of being divided, with liberty, which is freedom, the right of power to live one's own life without threats, fear, or some sort of retaliation. And justice, the principle or qualities of dealing fairly with others. For all, which means, boys and girls, it's as much your country as it is mine. And now, boys and girls, let me hear you recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since I was a small boy, 2 states have been added to our country, and 2 words have been added to the Pledge of Allegiance: under God. Wouldn't it be a pity if someone said that is a prayer and that would be eliminated from schools too?
All right. So that's the introduction to a paper that I wrote. All right. So let me find this paper. This was a paper I wrote. And the topic was classical appeals. Okay. And we kind of have mentioned those already. That would be the logos and the ethos and the pathos. Those are the classical appeals. So I was tasked with, writing a report of how those classical appeals could be used in action. And If we just look at the title page, I've got my running header up here. I've got the word that says running head, and my title, Classical Appeals in Action, is up there in all caps, and the page number is at the right-hand side. Once again, my title is written, Classical Appeals in Action, my name, my class, the date, and the professor who is in charge of the class. That's all that goes on a title page. Once we get into the main body, the header, there's the title again. Page 2, there's the title again. And then I have my introduction. And somewhere in here, we had to have a thesis. And you could easily find it with the word because. There's the word because right there, you know. So there's a thesis statement. My last line should be a preview sentence, which lists my headings. So background information, ethos, pathos, and logos, rhetorical situation, and conclusion. Let's scroll down. Background information, ethos, pathos, logos, rhetorical situations, and there's a conclusion. Somewhere in the conclusion, I'm going to have to restate my thesis. So let's look at this thesis for a minute. Red Skelton's rhetoric was most persuasive because it incorporated a good balance of ethos, logos, and pathos. Let me highlight that. So there is my thesis statement. In my thesis statement, it mentions what my paper is about, the classical appeals. The classical appeals are ethos, logos, and pathos. Now, let me zip on down to the conclusion, and let's see if that is restated in a similar way. Let's see. Red Skelton's rhetoric was most persuasive because it incorporated a good balance of ethos, logos, and pathos. So is it restated in a different way? Let's look. Here we go. Red Skelton's rhetoric incorporated a good balance of ethos, logos, and pathos. There you go. Restated in a different way. And I've got a reference page, and my reference page has several references, and they should be in alphabetical order, and they are in alphabetical order. They have hanging indents. The format is name, last name, middle initial, date in parentheses, the title, where only the first letter is capitalized. So in this case, this had a subtitle, so I could capitalize the first letter of the subtitle. And a source, and it was an online source, so I have retrieved from, and there's a URL. All right, so anyway, let's take a closer look, because I also have citations where I've looked up information from the source and I have to cite that. So what I've done is I've got another copy that I made that is color coded. So I'm just going to grab that other copy here and we'll take a look at this in greater detail. All right, so there I've highlighted my thesis statement and I've highlighted my preview statement. All right, so let's take a look at this introduction. As a school teacher, Keith Hale and his students recite the Pledge of Allegiance daily. Now you notice I wrote it in third person because in APA formatting, you're not supposed to use I, me, my, we, us, you, yours, all speak third person. He watches students half-heartedly mumble the words with base disrespect. Keith is especially bothered because he served 20 years in the United States Navy. He defended the flag, freedom, and livelihood of those students enjoy. Keith remembers a famous speech given by Richard Red Skelton on January 14th, 1969 to millions of American viewers on Columbia Broadcasting Systems. That's what CBS stands for, by the way. I don't know if you guys knew that CBS was Columbia Broadcasting Systems. Red Skelton Show. So Thesis statement. Red Skelton's rhetoric was most persuasive. There's the word because it incorporated a good balance of ethos, logos, and pathos. So a good thesis statement, I'm making a claim. My claim is Red Skelton's rhetoric was most persuasive. And then I have to give evidence. Why? Why am I making that claim? I use the word because it has a good balance of ethos, logos, and pathos. So now I have to spend the whole rest of the paper proving that that thesis statement is true. Without a thesis statement, why are you writing the paper? Okay. Keith will review the famous speech in light of a rhetorical situation and identify the use of ethos, pathos, logos by the rhetor. And so rhetoric is just speech. A rhetor is somebody who makes a speech. All right, this paper will discuss background information, ethos, pathos, and logos, the rhetorical situation, and a conclusion. Again, my previous sentence, all it does is introduce my headings. You must have headings. I had 3 or 4 people who turned in a paper that had no headings, which again, kind of kicked back that a little bit. All right, let's look at this. So Red Skelton was one of the most celebrated American character actors and comedians of the 20th century. He performed on the radio, television, and in front of live audiences. Red described himself as a clown instead of a comedian. He said, I've got a quote here. If I have a quotation, he said, that means I have to use a citation. So a comedian goes out and hits people right on. A clown uses pathos. He can be funny and then turn right around and reach people and touch them with what life is like. So there is his quote, his direct quote in quotation marks. Before I put the period, I have to have the citation, which I've put here in, I've highlighted in yellow. And what I'll do is let me make this a little bit bigger. Maybe, y'all can see that a little bit better if I make it bigger. Okay. So here's a direct quote, and I have to have a citation. Now, APA citation is in parentheses, and it happens before the period. A lot of people will make a mistake and put the period before the citation, but the citation is part of the sentence. If you put the period before the citation, then the citation just hanging out there, it's attached to nothing. Now, this UPI should be one of my references in my reference page or my bibliography. Now, the normal format for a direct quote would be the name, the date, and there should be a comma and then the page number. But with this particular source, there was no page number because it was a web page. But let's go ahead and take a look at that source, UPI. If I go down to my reference page, do I have UPI? Aha, United Press International. It was an article in the Beaver County Times retrieved from that URL. All right, let's go back up here. On January 14th, 1969, Red delivered a monologue while portraying his elementary school teacher and principal, Mr. Laswell. Mr. Laswell noticed the monotony in the voices of boys and girls as he recited the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Laswell then tried to convince the students of the importance of the pledge by explaining the meaning of each and every word. The powerful message of this speech gained new popularity in 2002 when a movement arose to remove words under God from the pledge. Now, somebody can raise the BS flag with that little statement right there. I've given a date. If I have a date here, I've really got to have some sort of a citation to prove this statement. What do you mean a movement arose in 2002 to remove under? I don't believe it. Well, if somebody could raise up the flag and say, that's BS, I don't believe it, you definitely need a citation. So I have a citation, redskelton.com, my name, and my date. Now notice there are no quotation marks. It is not a direct quote, but I've excuse me, I've said something from that source. And again, that information just didn't pop into my head out of space. I had to get that information somewhere. So let's go. As I'm reading your paper, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I will highlight your citation and verify it with the source. So let's find redskelton.com. Skelton R. Redskelton.com right here. Okay. So I'm now, that was all my background information. Now I'm going into ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos is appeal to the credibility of the speaker. Pathos is an appeal to the emotions aroused in the audience, and logos is the logic or reasonableness of the subject matter. Again, how do I know this is true? This information just didn't pop into my head. I had to get it from somewhere. Here is my reference, Hauser, Riley, and Torrenson, 2010. Do I have a reference there that says Hauser, Riley, and Torrens, 2010, right there? All right. A rhetor must demonstrate the command of their subject matter, show they are responsible and ethical, and prove they're a good person. Ethos displays the good sense, goodwill, and good character of the speaker. And again, that information came from that reference. Indeed, Red Skelton commanded the admiration and respect of the American people while portraying his elementary school teacher and principal, Mr. Lastwell. He established even more ethos for the audience. Red, dressed in a tuxedo, acted solemnly. Immediately, the audience imagines someone they can trust and respect. If Red appeared as a clown, a tramp, or other character, then his word would not have carried the same impact. So you can say he dressed for the part. Red Skelton uses pathos to appeal to the audience pride and patriotism. Remember, pathos is the emotion. These are the strong emotions in American people, especially in the midst of the Vietnam War. 1969, that was the Vietnam War. Red framed his monologue in a context of a concerned teacher instructing his pupils in the right way of doing things. The audience is drawn emotionally into the rhetoric because they know the situation is good and right. Logos or logic is found as Mr. Lastwell carefully defines each word of the pledge. For example, the pledge is described as dedicating all of my worldly goods to give without self-pity. And we saw that. And this was a direct quote. Now notice I put the direct quote inside the sentence, and there's the quotation marks, and my citation comes after the quotation mark, but before the punctuation. Through the persona of Mr. Lastwell, Red masterfully weaves ethos, pathos, and logos together to persuade his audience of the value of the Pledge of Allegiance. The date of Red's speech is significant. 1969 was a tumultuous time in our country. Thousands of our military men were fighting and dying in a war across the globe. Civil unrest and war protesting were dividing our nation. Parents and children found it hard to understand the other's point of view on these issues. Perhaps Red was trying to refocus his audience and invigorate a sense of pride and patriotism in America. His words are timeless. His speech is just relevant now as it was then. So the rhetorical situation. The rhetorical situation describes the context in which the rhetor will engage his audience with a particular message communicated for a specific response. Lloyd Bitzer describes the rhetorical situation as a rhetorical response to some issue, problem, or concern. And again, how do I know all this? This stuff just didn't drop out of thin air. So I have to have a reference for all of this stuff, and there the reference is. And the reference happens before the period. The speaker must carefully analyze his audience to ensure the message will make an impact. The audience is the one who can address the issue or exergence. The speaker must determine a strategy and vehicle for delivering his message to meet the intended outcome. Constraints must be considered. These include the time, place, events, and situation. The exigence was a lack of pride and patriotism Red was observing in our country. The audience was his television viewers. These were millions of Americans from every race, creed, color, and walk of life. The constraints were the Vietnam War and the civil unrest that was dividing our nation. Red was using his power and influence to strike right at the heart of the American people and cause them to reflect on who they were as Americans. Conclusion: rhetoric is a persuasive communication experience between a speaker and a targeted audience. It has an intended purpose and is often used to address a specific problem or issue. Good rhetoric combines ethos, pathos, and logos to influence a change. Red Skelton employed his fame and influence to address the declining patriotism he observed from his countrymen. Red Skelton's rhetoric incorporated a good balance of ethos, logos, and pathos, restating the thesis. His words are timeless and his rhetoric useful. People remember his speech and still refer to it whenever the Pledge of Allegiance comes under fire. And there you go. There's all the references. Boom. Okay. So that is a basic APA paper. I was given an assignment. I researched for that assignment. I wrote the paper in APA format. I paid attention to all of the checks in the blocks. I'm all about checks in the blocks. That's why I got me a checklist. That's why I provided that checklist for you. So again, whenever you write, whenever you complete any assignment, make sure you print out the instructions. Make sure you print out the grading rubric. Make sure you have a copy of this APA checklist that I shared with you. It's in the announcement section. Print that out. Use these tools as you write, and you'll get a good grade. If you skip any of that stuff, I'm compelled by the rules of that grading rubric to mark off points. I don't like to mark off points for silly stuff. And, not having your paper properly formatted when I've provided you a template, that's silly. Don't be silly. Use the tools that we have here to succeed. And again, APA formatted papers are not exclusive to the English class. In fact, most English classes use something called MLA formatting and not APA. But the reason that we are stressing the APA formatting paper in this class is simply because every other college class that you take are going to require you to write papers in APA formatting. So the purpose of this class is to get you familiar with how to write in APA, get you familiar with how to research subjects, research sources, gather the information you need to make a compelling argument in your papers. The whole purpose of this class is to teach you to properly cite those sources and also to make sure you do not plagiarize. So the reason we cite is so that we do not plagiarize, because plagiarism is theft, and we do not want to steal somebody else's intellectual property, especially in this day and age where I can take your paper and run it through a grammar checker and a plagiarism checker, and within about a minute and a half, it'll tell me if you've plagiarized or not. It'll tell me where you got the information from. So, even if you properly cite your paper and you run it through a plagiarism checker, it will still come up as plagiarism. But if it identifies something as, this has been plagiarized, well, do you have the citation right next to it? And if you have the citation, then, you're good to go. It'll tell you, 25% of this paper is plagiarized. Or one of my favorite things, I tell this to my high school students. I know what high school students write like. And so when I get a young student, trying to choose my words very carefully here. When I get a young student who I observe every day, and he does not have a good command of the English language, but all of a sudden, man, he's writing like an expert, that sends up the little flag. And I'm like, okay, something isn't right here. So I will just copy his first or second sentence and paste it right into the Google search bar. Wham! It'll tell me exactly where he stole that stuff from. So plagiarism, bad. Plagiarism, bad.